This is what Jospeh Stalin did to Soviet women, and it begins in the unlikeliest way. In 1917, Russian women marched for bread and peace, sparking a revolution that promised to upend centuries of oppression. Overnight, they gained rights unknown anywhere else. Abortion was legalized in 1920, voting, even a department of the Communist Party solely for women's advocacy. But barely a decade later, Stalin declared the women's question solved. The Genodel was shut down. Women were left suddenly unprotected just as the state demanded more from them than ever. How could a dream of liberation be turned against the very people it was meant to free? The answer changed millions of lives, and it starts here. March 1917. Crowds of women fill the streets of Petrograd, banners raised high, voices raw with hunger and hope. Their demand is simple: bread and peace. Within days, the Tsar is gone. In the vacuum, something nearly unthinkable happens. On March 15th, the provisional government issues a decree. Elections will be held without distinction of gender. For the first time in Russian history, women hold the right to vote and stand for office, not just in theory, but in law. By November, women are casting ballots in the Constituent Assembly elections, their turnout rivaling or even surpassing men's in some regions. In July, the decree is expanded. All women over 20 are included, sweeping away centuries of legal exclusion in a single stroke. The revolution moves fast. The Bolsheviks seize power in October, and the 1918 Constitution of the Russian Socialist Federative Soviet Republic cements these gains. Men and women, equal before the law. The language is explicit. No citizen shall be denied rights because of sex. It's not just politics. Alexandra Kollontai and her allies press for more. The new government issues a decree on women's rights, opening the doors to divorce, education, and legal equality. For millions, the world cracks open. Marriage laws are rewritten, making divorce accessible. The state promises protection for mothers, maternity leave, and support for women in the workplace. In 1920, the Soviet Union becomes the first country on earth to legalize abortion. The decree is blunt. Better a safe procedure in a hospital than a desperate act in a back alley. It's a policy born of harsh reality: poverty, war, broken families. The government frames it as a temporary step, a bridge to a future where socialism will solve the root causes. But for now, it means life or death for countless women. The Genodel, the women's department of the Communist Party, springs up in 1919. Its mission: to bring these rights to life, to teach women to read, to organize nurseries, to fight for equal pay and protection against abuse. Across the country, activists travel by train and horseback, holding congresses and opening clubs, determined to pull women into public life. They set up communal kitchens, kindergartens, and literacy drives. In cities, women take jobs as factory inspectors, union delegates, and party officials. In the countryside, they battle old customs, forced marriage, and illiteracy. The pace is dizzying, the optimism real. For a brief moment, the promise of liberation feels tangible. Russian women newly enfranchised are building a country where their voices matter. The laws are clear. The future seems possible. But the question lingers: can paper rights survive the hard realities of power, tradition, and coming storms? January 1930. In a closed meeting, the Central Committee makes its decision. Genodel, the women's department, is finished. The official line is simple: the woman's question is solved. Equality, they say, is now the law of the land. No more need for special advocates, no more separate department. The order is signed, the offices shuttered, and just like that, 12 years of work are swept aside. For the women who built Genodel from scratch, who rode trains to distant villages, who coaxed mothers into classrooms, who opened the first nurseries in factory districts, the news lands like a hammer blow. In Moscow and Leningrad, the phone lines go silent. Regional offices shut their doors. Local party bosses, never eager to spend money on creches or literacy clubs, quietly cross those programs off the budget. The activists who once held congresses and organized women's councils are reassigned, demoted, or simply let go. In the provinces, reports trickle in. Nurseries close, kindergartens cut hours, women's reading groups fold for lack of space and support. In Central Asia, where Genadel had been the only buffer between tradition and the state, the consequences are harsher. Without careful negotiation, campaigns to unveil women turn brutal. Local officials lacking Genodel's experience use force instead of persuasion, sparking backlash and fear. The numbers tell their own story. In the year after abolition, the steady rise in women's party membership stalls. Fewer women are sent to regional congresses. The pipeline to leadership, already narrow, shrinks to a trickle. In Ukraine, village women lose their only organized voice. In Uzbekistan, the clubs that once taught girls to read and offered protection from forced marriage disappear almost overnight. Memoirs from former Genodel workers capture the sense of loss. A movement dissolved, a promise abruptly withdrawn. What remains is a vacuum. The state promises that unions and local Soviets will take up the work, but few have the will or resources. Instead, women's needs are folded into broader party programs, diluted and deprioritized. The support structures that made it possible for mothers to work, for girls to learn, for women to speak, gone or left to wither. The era of mass mobilization is coming, but now, Soviet women will enter it without their own advocates, facing the demands of a new age alone. Steel mills thundered, textile looms rattled, and the clatter of typewriters echoed through government offices. By the end of Stalin's first five-year plan, women made up 43% of the industrial workforce. Millions in factories, mines, and construction sites, their hands shaping the new Soviet state. The state's message was clear. The country needed every able body, and the future belonged to those who could outwork the past. Propaganda posters plastered city walls, rosy-cheeked women in overalls, sleeves rolled, hair tied back, smiling beside tractors or stacks of ammunition. The face of this campaign belonged to Pasha Angelina, a tractor driver from the Don Steppe. She didn't just break quotas, she shattered them, leading the first all-female tractor brigade and inspiring the slogan, "We can do anything." Her name became a rallying cry, her image a symbol of Soviet progress. But behind the headlines, Angelina's letters spoke of exhaustion, loneliness, and the grinding pressure to always do more. The numbers climbed higher. By 1935, women accounted for 38% of students in higher education, crowding into lecture halls to study engineering, chemistry, and medicine. In hospitals, nearly 8 out of 10 doctors wore skirts beneath their white coats. The state celebrated these achievements with parades and medals, but the reality was heavier than any award. The working day rarely ended at the factory gate. At home, the second shift began: laundry, cooking, caring for children, patching uniforms by candlelight. The double burden became a proverb among urban women. We work ourselves to death in two places, the factory and at home. Managers boasted of record production, but accident rates soared. Reports from the late 1930s, buried in party archives, revealed that women faced longer hours, lower pay, and more dangerous conditions than the men beside them. Discrimination lingered in every promotion denied, every wage slip shorted. Yet quitting was not an option. The quotas had to be met. The plan had to be fulfilled. Every morning, women lined up at factory gates as whistles blew, their faces set against the wind. They were building socialism with their hands and their backs, but the cost, fatigue, lost time with children, dreams deferred, was paid in silence. The numbers looked impressive. The lived reality was a daily test of endurance, and there would be no pause for rest. Not yet. June 27, 1936. The new family code lands on every desk in the Soviet Union with the weight of a verdict. The decree is blunt. Abortion, once legal and common, is now a crime. Only a panel of doctors, appointed by the state, can grant exceptions, and only for the gravest medical reasons. The language is clinical, but the intent is unmistakable. The state wants more children. Women's bodies are recast as demographic assets, their wombs counted like steel and grain in the national plan. Inside the Politburo, the debate is tense. Health commissars warn of rising deaths from botched abortions, the shadow economy of desperate midwives, the shortage of safe contraceptives. But the leadership is unmoved. Birth rates have fallen. The scars of famine and purges have thinned the population. The solution, they insist, is discipline, not mercy. The law expands. Divorce becomes a labyrinth of paperwork and fees, a privilege for the wealthy or the well-connected. The days of walking into a registry office and walking out single are over. Each divorce now costs at least 50 rubles, a week's wage for most, and the state reserves the right to refuse. Every aspect of family life is drawn into the bureaucratic net. Couples must now appear before special boards to plead for a legal abortion. These panels, almost always male, almost always loyal, ask questions, demand proof, and keep records. For women, the process is humiliating and often futile. Letters pour into Moscow from every corner of the country, mothers with too many mouths to feed, wives whose husbands have vanished in the camps, girls barely out of school. Most are turned away. Some take their chances in back rooms and alleyways. Hospital wards fill with women bleeding, feverish, silent from fear of prosecution. The propaganda machine shifts gears. Posters praise the Soviet mother as the bedrock of the nation. Films and newsreels celebrate large families, and the state begins to offer medals and cash bonuses for women who bear many children. But the reality is harsher. Single mothers face new taxes and social stigma. Children born outside marriage lose inheritance rights. The message is clear. The future belongs to those who serve the state, not themselves. In the clinics and kitchens, the cost is counted in lives lost and choices denied. The law is the law, and the state's need outweighs every plea. Inside the walls of the Gulag, the promise of equality vanished. Women made up as much as 30% of the camp population. Tens of thousands condemned for petty theft, forbidden letters, or simply being the wife or daughter of an enemy. The numbers are staggering, but numbers can't speak. Eugenia Ginsburg can. Arrested in 1937, she was swept from a university lecture hall to a cell, then across a continent to the labor camps of Kolyma. Her memoirs record the hunger, the cold, and the constant threat. Guards who traded food for silence, inmates who learned that protection often came at a price. One night on a prison train, a guard tried to force himself on her. She fought him off, but not everyone could. The risk was always there. For many, the only defense was to band together. Ginsburg became the leader of a women's brigade, sharing scraps of food, pooling their strength to survive the endless work shifts and the gaze of men who saw them as property. Camp reports from Magadan and Vorkuta, buried in state archives, list the causes of death, malnutrition, exposure, disease, but never mention the sexual violence that haunted the barracks. Survivor accounts fill in the silence. Some women entered relationships with guards or fellow prisoners, hoping for extra bread or lighter work. Others were forced, then blamed for their own abuse. There was no justice, only endurance. The famine years brought their own brand of terror. In Ukraine, as crops withered and quotas rose, women became the face of hunger and standing in line for hours, trading their last possessions for a handful of grain. NKVD reports labeled them thieves for gleaning fields or bartering scraps. Many were arrested for trying to keep their children alive. In the chaos, exploitation flourished. Testimonies collected decades later speak of women who faced demands for sex from local officials in exchange for food or protection. The official record is silent, but the scars remain. By the end of the 1930s, the gap between law and life was unbridgeable. The state had promised to lift women up, but in the camps and famine villages, survival depended on luck, solidarity, and a kind of stubborn hope. Ginsburg survived the Gulag, but most did not. For Soviet women, the price of endurance was measured in silence, sacrifice, and the memory of those who never came home. War did not spare Soviet women. It swallowed them whole, then demanded more. By June 1941, as German tanks rolled across the border, the call went out. Not just for men, but for anyone who could serve. Over 800,000 women put on the uniform of the Red Army. Some learned to shoot, crawl, and dig in beside men twice their size. Others became medics, radio operators, snipers, and pilots. The Night Witches, women aviators flying plywood biplanes, haunted German lines with midnight bombing runs, engines cut, gliding in silent as ghosts. Nurses and doctors dragged the wounded from burning tanks, stitched flesh in field hospitals, and sometimes picked up rifles themselves when the line broke. No front was untouched. Leningrad's siege, Stalingrad's ruins, the forests of Belarus. Women fought, bled, and died alongside their brothers. The price was counted in medals and in graves. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the country was broken and nearly 1 in 8 Soviets was gone. The state surveyed the damage and saw a crisis: millions dead, millions more wounded, and the birth rate in freefall. Stalin's answer was not mercy, but a new command. In July 1944, the government announced the Mother Heroine Award. The rules were strict and simple: 10 or more living children, raised for the glory of the motherland. The medal was heavy, gold and enamel, but the cash bonus mattered more in a country of empty shops and ration cards. There were other prizes: the Order of Maternal Glory for 7 or 8 children, the Motherhood Medal for 5 or 6. The state praised these women as saviors, the backbone of the nation, their faces splashed across posters and parades. But the reality behind the honors was relentless. The same hands that had loaded shells and bandaged wounds now rocked cradles, queued for bread, patched clothes, and buried the dead. The state's need for bodies became a demand pressed into every kitchen and hospital ward. To refuse was unthinkable. To comply meant a life of exhaustion and sacrifice. The mother heroine was celebrated, but she was also conscripted, her fertility a matter of state policy, her private life measured in quotas and ceremonies. For Soviet women, the war never truly ended. It only changed uniform, from soldier to mother, from hero to instrument of recovery. The cost was counted not just in medals, but in the years given, the choices lost, the silence that followed. By 1939, Soviet women made up 43% of the industrial workforce, an unprecedented figure achieved under Stalin's drive for rapid modernization. Yet, as the documentary has shown, these gains came as the state closed the Genodel in 1930. The Institut banned abortion in 1936 and imposed new controls over family life. Official records confirm that between 13% and 30% of Gulag prisoners were women, and 800,000 served in World War II. Despite extensive documentation, many files on individual experiences and state policy debates remain classified, leaving parts of this history in the shadows. Today, historians agree that Stalin's policies gave Soviet women opportunities and burdens in equal measure. The legacy of rapid mobilization without lasting advocacy still shapes debates about gender and state power in modern Russia. The documented evidence is clear. Promises of equality were often rewritten by state priorities, and the cost was borne by millions of women whose stories are still being uncovered.